You have pictured medieval London 100 times without realizing it. The cathedral spires, the muddy markets, the knights, the timber houses leaning over narrow lanes. But there is one thing every single one of those people did, every single day, that no film, no painting, no costume drama ever shows you. They had to go to the toilet. Tens of thousands of people in a crowded walled city with no flushing pipes, no sewers as we know them, no running water in the home. And the real story of how London solved that problem, the law, the engineering, the best paid worst job in history, and the ways the whole business could quietly end you, is one of the strangest and most genuinely human chapters of the entire Middle Ages. We're Arthur's living history, and using AI trained on city ordinances, coroner's rolls, and the archaeology dug out of London's own buried cesspits, we rebuild these vanished worlds frame by frame. And in the next few minutes, you are going to find out why the word for your bedroom wardrobe was once the word for a toilet, how a beloved Lord Mayor of London left the city a public lavatory with 128 seats, why one profession earned more than a master craftsman for the most revolting job imaginable, and how a man could, and did, fall straight through his own toilet and not come back up. Let me start with the basic, unglamorous reality. For most ordinary Londoners, in most ordinary homes, the toilet was a pot, a chamber pot, ceramic, wood or metal, kept under the bed or in the corner. You used it, and then somebody had to empty it. And here is where medieval London's most notorious habit comes in. The quick, lazy, deeply antisocial solution was to simply open the window and fling the contents into the street or the alley below. This happened so much, so often, that the city authorities had to pass actual laws against it. Think about that. You do not write a law forbidding something nobody does. They were legislating against a daily rain of waste from the upper windows of London, and the streets paid the price. Medieval London's lanes could become so thick with filth, human waste, animal waste, kitchen muck, all of it churned into the mud, that the city had to employ men called Muckrakers, whose entire job was to scrape the streets and cart the filth out beyond the walls. Like the men we will meet shortly, the Muckrakers were paid surprisingly well because somebody has to, and almost nobody wants to. Streets near the meat markets were the worst. There were lanes in old London whose names were so frankly descriptive of what flowed down them that later, more delicate generations quietly renamed them. Some of those polite modern street names are covering up a very pungent past. And one question everybody secretly wants answered: what did they use instead of toilet paper? Because paper was far too precious to wipe with. The archaeology of London's cesspits gives us a genuine answer. The most common materials were moss and hay, and not just any moss. Excavators have identified specific species, like glittering wood moss and red-stemmed feather moss, pulled out of medieval pits, which means people were, in effect, choosing the soft, absorbent kinds on purpose. Beyond moss, there was straw, leaves, and scraps of old rag. The wealthy could afford the real luxury, soft wool or linen cloth. So the gulf between rich and poor in medieval London ran right down to the most private moment of the day. The gentry-level option was a handful of moss, and the deluxe upgrade was a piece of wool. Some divides really do run all the way down. Now, if you had a little money, you did not just squat over a pot, you had a garderobe. And here is the first genuinely delightful fact of this whole story. A garderobe was a built-in toilet, a small room or a niche, usually with a wooden bench and a hole cut in it, often jutting out from an upper floor or built into the thickness of a stone wall. The word garderobe is French. It literally means guard the robes. It is the same root as our modern word wardrobe. So why on earth is a toilet named after a clothes cupboard? Two reasons, and both are wonderful. First, you often had to walk through the room where clothes and valuables were stored to reach the privy, so the names blurred together. But second, and this is the part I love, the sharp ammonia fumes rising up from the waste below were genuinely believed to keep moths and fleas out of your woolens. So wealthy households deliberately kept their expensive clothes in or near the toilet because the stench was a kind of medieval mothball. The next time you open your wardrobe, know that the word in your mouth once meant the smelliest corner of a castle. In a castle, the garderobe often jutted right out from the wall, with the chute dropping the waste cleanly down the outside into the moat or a pit far below. Practical, but it created a genuine military weakness that besieging armies learned to exploit. According to a long-standing account of the siege of Château Gaillard in 1204, the great fortress Richard the Lionheart had built in Normandy, French attackers found their way up into the castle through exactly such a latrine chute, climbing the toilet shaft to get inside. Whether every detail is true or not, the principle was real enough that castle builders worried about it. The toilet was, quite literally, a hole in your defences. There is something deeply human in the thought of the most powerful fortifications in Europe being undone through the privy. So you have done your business in the garderobe. Where does it actually go? That depended entirely on where you lived. In a riverside building, the simplest answer was a chute, a long shaft built into the wall, dropping the waste straight down, and in plenty of grand buildings along the Thames, that chute emptied directly, gloriously, into the river. The Thames was London's great drain, its water supply, its highway, and its toilet, often all at once, which tells you a great deal about why medieval cities were so regularly visited by disease. The buried rivers of London, the Fleet, the Walbrook, did the same grim work, carrying the city's waste down to the Thames. But most homes were not on the river. For everyone else, the chute dropped down to a cesspit. The cesspit is the unsung hero and villain of this entire story. It was a pit dug under the cellar or out in the yard, often lined with stone, into which all the household waste collected. Cleverly, the pits were usually built so they were not watertight. The liquid could seep away into the surrounding earth, leaving the solid waste behind to be dealt with later. A well-built cesspit could go around 2 years before it needed emptying, and cesspits caused such constant friction between neighbours that London developed detailed law about them. There was a 13th century city ordinance specifying exactly how far a stone-lined cesspit had to sit from your neighbour's property line, and an even greater distance was required if your pit was not properly stone-walled because of the seepage. Londoners sued each other furiously and frequently over leaking, stinking, overflowing pits next door. 700 years ago, your worst neighbour dispute was not a noisy party. It was the cesspit slowly soaking through the wall into your cellar. And we know these pits intimately because archaeologists have dug them up, including, in the 1980s, a beautifully made 3-seater oak toilet bench lifted straight out of a late medieval London cesspit. A bench for 3. Privacy was simply not the priority it is now. But the cesspit had a darker side, because using a medieval toilet could genuinely end you. Picture the most infamous case recorded in the city's own grim files. The year is 1326. A man named Richard the Raker is sitting at his privy in London, going about his entirely ordinary business, when the rotten wooden planks of the seat beneath him give way. He falls, not onto the floor, but straight down into the full cesspit below his own house. And he does not climb out. Richard the Raker, by the bleak account of the record, is lost in the contents of his own toilet. It sounds almost like a joke, and yet it was a real person's final moment, and it was not even unique. There are other recorded cases across medieval Europe of people, including nobles, falling through privy seats into the pit below. The fumes alone, from the decomposing waste in those airless pits, could overcome a grown man and leave him senseless. Honestly, that is the detail that stays with me. We talk about the Middle Ages as a time of plagues and wars, of grand and terrible ways for a life to end. And then you find a man whose story ends because a plank gave way at the worst possible moment. History is so often not the epic version. It is the human, fragile, faintly absurd version, which brings us to the people who had to deal with the full pits. Because a cesspit eventually fills, and when it does, somebody has to empty it by hand. These were the Gong farmers, and theirs is, with very little competition, a contender for the worst job in all of history. The word gong is wonderfully old. In Old English, it referred both to the waste itself and to the privy. So a Gong farmer farmed the waste, scraping, digging and hauling solidified human muck, bucket by bucket, out of the city's cesspits. Now here is the twist that surprises everyone. They were paid extremely well. A Gong farmer could earn around 2 shillings a day, or per ton hauled, which was significantly more than a skilled carpenter or stonemason made at the time, sometimes 3 times an unskilled labourer's wage. We even have names. In 1406, a Gong farmer named Thomas Watergate was paid the handsome sum of 40 shillings for cleaning out the royal latrine at Westminster Palace. And yes, with a name like Watergate, he was practically born to the trade. But that money came wrapped in misery and in rules. By London law, Gong farmers were nightmen. They were only permitted to work in the small hours, roughly 9 at night until 5 in the morning, so the sights and the staggering smell would not offend respectable citizens by daylight. The smell, by some accounts, could be detected 3 streets away. Regulations could require them to ring a bell as they moved through the streets with their carts, warning people to shut their windows and stay inside. They wore leather aprons and, in some accounts, cloth masks soaked in vinegar in a desperate attempt to filter the air. And the smell clung to them so completely that Gong farmers were often required to live in designated areas outside the city walls, set apart from everyone else. They were among the best paid workers in London and among the most thoroughly avoided, and the city took its sanitation rules seriously, sometimes savagely. There is a record of one London Gong farmer who broke the rules by pouring waste down a drain rather than carting it away properly. His punishment was almost poetically grim. He was placed in one of his own pipes, filled up to his chin with the very gong he had dumped, and then put on public display in Golden Lane with a sign spelling out his offence. Medieval London did not believe in subtle deterrence. So if your home had no garderobe and you were caught short out in the city, what then? Remarkably, London had public toilets. There were 2 public latrines on London Bridge itself, one at each end, perched over the river, so everything dropped straight into the rushing water below. London was not alone in this either. Across England, towns built their public privies out over bridges and rivers wherever they could, because running water did the cleaning for free. In York, the public conveniences were so frankly named that the locals called them the pissing holes, built out over the Ouse Bridge. In Exeter, a vaulted public latrine over the river was known, rather more charmingly, as the Fairy House. Wherever there was a tidal river or a strong current, a medieval town tended to build a toilet over it. And these public conveniences turn up in the most human little stories. There is a record of a debtor who, cornered by the men he owed money to, announced that he urgently needed the latrine, stepped inside the public privy, and promptly slipped out the back and vanished, leaving his creditors waiting outside. The medieval toilet as a getaway route. Some tricks are simply timeless, and none of this waste was wasted, by the way. The night soil the Gong farmers hauled out of the city did not simply vanish into a hole somewhere. A great deal of it was carted out to the fields beyond the walls and sold to farmers as fertilizer. The city's filth went out, and the city's food came back in grown on it. It was, in its grim way, one of the most thorough recycling systems any society has ever run. Nobody designed it to be green, but it absolutely was. But the crown jewel of London's public sanitation, and one of the most extraordinary structures of the medieval city, was built thanks to a man whose name you already know, even if you do not realize it. Richard Whittington. Yes, that Whittington, the real Lord Mayor of London, behind the famous Dick Whittington and his cat pantomime. Whittington was fabulously wealthy and famously generous, and when he was gone, his estate funded a string of public works. One of them, opening around the 1st of May, 1421, was a public toilet so vast it almost defies belief. It was called the Longhouse, and it had 128 seats, 64 for men and 64 for women, making it notably the first public toilet in London with separate sections for the sexes. And the engineering was genuinely clever. The Longhouse was built over a dock by the mouth of the buried river Walbrook, right where it met the tidal Thames. The waste dropped into a gully beneath the seats, and twice a day, every day, the rising and falling tide of the Thames swept in and flushed the whole thing clean, free of charge, courtesy of the moon. 128 Londoners could sit side by side in 2 long rows, and the river did the rest. And here is a final touch that says everything about the medieval mind. Built directly above this enormous public toilet were almshouses, homes for several poor parishioners. People lived, slept, and ate directly over a 128-seat communal latrine. And at the time, nobody seems to have thought that especially strange. If you want to know who really had it best, though, it was the monks. Large monasteries often possessed the most advanced plumbing in all of medieval England. They built long communal latrines, sometimes called reredators, alongside their dormitories, and the truly clever ones diverted a stream straight through stone channels beneath the seats, creating a constant running flush, centuries before the flush toilet was invented. Some had drainage, even ventilation. While a London merchant was suing his neighbour over a leaking pit, the monks down the road had effectively built running water. Cleanliness, it turned out, really was next to godliness. And the strangest part of all this? It worked, more or less, for centuries. The flushing toilet most of us picture would not become common in Britain until the 1800s and 1900s. Whittington's Great Longhouse kept serving Londoners into the 17th century. You can walk near the old site today, just west of Cannon Street Station, on streets that have completely forgotten what once stood there. And every time you say wardrobe or step into the loo, you are speaking faintly the language of medieval London's plumbing. The past is not as far beneath us as we like to think. Sometimes it is exactly beneath us. We're Arthur's living history, and stories like this one, the everyday, overlooked, gloriously human machinery of the past that the grand histories skip right over, are exactly why we sit up too late with the old city records. Tell us in the comments, would you rather have braved Richard the Raker's rotten plank or taken a seat among the 128 at Whittington's Longhouse? And tell us which forgotten corner of ordinary history, how they bathed, how they ate, how they slept, you would like us to walk into next. Subscribe to keep crossing these centuries with us, because what we are quietly working on next is bigger, stranger, and more carefully made than anything we have brought you so far. History remembers the kings and the castles, but somebody always had to deal with the rest, quietly, at night, for good pay and no thanks. And when you flush and forget, spare a thought for the nightmen who never could. Don't forget to check out the video recommended by YouTube on the left side of the screen.